Okay, welcome back. We're now on module number 7. Again, remember, the treaties are covenants between two nations. One way to break a treaty is that when one party is no longer a nation, or seen to be, or recognized, accepted to be a nation. And that occurs through genocide. Now this begs a question. The question is, if the Indian nations are indeed nations, and if indeed they're parties to the treaty, then isn't it their responsibility to provide housing, to provide conditions of life that don't destroy a people in whole or in part, to educate their children, health care, and so on, hunting rights? And that's true. But the purpose of the treaty is to provide the conditions for nations to be able to do that themselves, or as a consideration for no more war, for peace. Those responsibilities were assumed under the treaty themselves. If you read the treaties talk about the right to keep and bear arms to hunt. They talk about the responsibility to provide funds for Indian education and schooling. They talk about the right of Indians to have health care services provided to them, okay, as part of the condition of the treaty. And other conditions that nations require in order for sustainability, in order to produce and reproduce the means of subsistence, the culture, the nation, the people, the Oyate. All of those are part of the terms of the treaty themselves. So when Indians, for example, are put in a situation like Pine Ridge, with 17 people in one house on the average, with over 80% of the homes condemnable because of the levels of asbestos and radon gas. Sometimes, in some cases, for example, at Pine Ridge, you have houses that have 8 and 10 times the allowable amounts of radon gas in a house. And this is common. These are conditions that have existed since even the beginning of the treaties themselves, and they've been maintained all along. And again, the purpose was extermination of a people as a people, and thus able to demand the terms of the treaty being kept. Now we have only one side defining what are the terms of the treaty and what terms of the treaty they're prepared to even recognize and accept. And we already went through this, didn't we? Article 6, Section 2, right? Once treaties are ratified and signed, they become part of the supreme law of the land. It's not like a buffet. You don't say, I'm going to keep this part here, but I'm going to ignore this part here. It doesn't work that way. Okay? Look at the historical homelands of the Lakota. Look at the historical homelands of the Blackfoot. And look at how much has been left to those nations today. Look at where the reserves are today relative to where they were, their historical recognized homelands of the Lakota, right in the Fort Laramie Treaty. Look at the recognized homelands of the Blackfoot in the Lame Wolf Treaty. And look at what's left today. Imagine, for example, I come to your house and I put a gun to your head, or I give you a document in a language you can't understand. And then basically I take all of your land that you're living on right now. And then what I say is, see that little corner over there? That little corner over there with all the weeds in it and the infertile soil, and it appears not to be any gold or minerals in that part. That's your part of your own land. From now on, I'm going to recognize what was once your whole land. I'm going to recognize a part of it, a little corner of it, as yours. That is, by the way, unless I find valuable minerals on it. If I find valuable minerals on it, that's not even your land anymore. I'm giving you this land in order that you'll sign a treaty, in order that you'll give us peace and not war. Wars, by the way, we started, not the Indians. Indians fought defensive wars. The history is very clear on that point. So, in other words, here's your historical homeland. Here's Here's a little part I'm going to give you here for the reserve. And I made sure that I've done an assessment of the whole land. I make sure that the part I'm giving you, it doesn't have anything I want on it. That I can't grow anything on it. And in return for recognizing this as your land, all the rest of it, of what used to be your homeland, is now property of the U.S. government. And furthermore, it gets better. Because under the Dawes Act, guess what? Under the Dawes Act, I'm only going to recognize this part of your historical homeland as now yours. If you do what? If you delink yourself as a Lakota person, as a member of the Lakota Nation, or the Blackfoot Nation. If you de-citizen yourself, if you now recognize yourself as a Native American, meaning an American with a Native history, you're now no longer Lakota, you're now no longer Blackfoot, you're a Native American, like an Irish American, like a German American, like an African American. You're just another kind of American. And if you're another kind of American, guess what? You've just abrogated your treaties. Because the treaty doesn't talk about Native Americans. The treaty is called an American Indian Treaty. Specifically, it is a treaty between the Lakota Nation, a group of people, signed for by the traditional authorities of the Lakota people, who were what? Who were selected through a system of governance. The leadership of all Indian nations is appointed through, and removable through, I might add, easily removable through, a traditional system of governance. And by abolishing these authorities as authorities, you also what? Abolish the system of governance. Bundle holders, pipe carriers, medicine people, the historical leadership, what some people call chiefs. You're abolishing the whole system of governance and imposing your own. And the condition of even a part of your own historical land being recognized is you no longer call yourself a Lakota. You no longer call yourself a Blackfoot. You now call yourself, if you call yourself anything, an American or a Native American. So when you go to court and you say, they ask you, are you a Native American? Or are you an American? If you say yes, if you don't say, I'm Lakota, I'm Blackfoot, what you are doing is aiding and abetting the extermination of what you call your own people. You are aiding and abetting the abrogation of the treaties your own people signed. You're aiding and abetting the abrogation of recognition of your people as a people. Lakota aren't Blackfoot. Blackfoot aren't Lakota. We're not Tlingit. We're not, we're not Iroquois. They are each nation with their own culture, their own language. We have some things in common. There's no doubt about that. In terms of how we see the world and how we see our role in all of creation, there are common parallels among all Indian nations. But there are also very real differences. Some nations dance clockwise. A couple nations dance counterclockwise. We don't argue about it. There are ways. Just like we don't argue about what Danish people do in Denmark. That's what Danish people do. And so the issue is genocide. And that is how America was built. And the purpose of genocide is not simple racism. That's there too. But no one's born racist. No one's born a genocidal maniac. People become racists in order to rationalize interests that they've acquired. Because now they're not subjugating a people because they're not people. They talk about casinos, for example. Out of every $1 of gross casino profit, about 51 cents goes out to the to the investors, the ones who bring in the slot machines and all the rest of that stuff. All white. Trump, Bally, some of the big companies. And that leaves us 49 cents, typically. And of that 49 cents, about 31 cents goes out for licensing, lawyers, taxes, believe it or not. Yes, you have to pay taxes. There's some taxes have to be paid on casinos, believe it or not. So that leaves us about 18 cents. And of that 18 cents, about 5 cents goes to the BIA for handling and administrative costs. Why? Because if you're an Indian in America or Canada, guess what? You can't start your own business without a BIA certificate. You can't sell your own handicrafts and your artwork without a BIA license. You can't pick up a rock that has a unique look on it, maybe as a souvenir or something, and sell it without a BIA certificate, without a license to sell it by the BIA. Why? Because you're an Indian. And Indian means you're a ward. Ward means you need to be protected from your own feeble-mindedness and idiocy. So you have to have the BIA to protect you from being taken advantage of. That's the argument they use. So that leaves us then about 13 cents out of each gross profit dollar. And of that 13 cents, another 5 cents or so is skimmed off through corruption. That leaves us about 8 cents out of every gross profit dollar that goes anywhere near the res or anywhere near everyday common Indians. This is typical. And of that 8 cents, most of that goes into programs. And many of those programs are, guess what? They're dominated by the relations of the tribal insiders. When you go on a typical Indian reserve, you can spot who the tribal chairman is. He's the one with the big house with no cracks in it. He's the one with the 2 big diesel pickup trucks outside. He's the one with the satellite antenna and gets every package you can imagine on tribal funds. That's typical. Not everyone, but that's typical. And so of that 8 cents out of every gross profit dollar, of that 8 cents that goes anywhere near the average Indian on the res, it goes into programs, many of which there's also skimming going on. There's tribal council members putting their half-wit relatives on the payroll. There's nepotism, there's cronyism, there's all kinds of stuff going on. So not even this 8 cents does much to reach the average res Indian. These are facts. Not every tribe, but this is typical. This is absolutely typical of what you'll find. And so what we're getting into is, why aren't these Indians taking care of their own stuff? Because they were part of the terms of the treaty. They were part of the consideration that Indians gave up. You see? Or acquired, I should say, excuse me. And that the other side gave up. In return for what? In return for peace and in return for their attempt to establish property rights on lands that were not their own. So just keep that in mind as we proceed on. How would you feel if someone came and took over your whole land and then gave you a little part of it, the worst part of it right here, on the condition that you give up any allegiance to or recognition of your heritage and where you came from? You see? Is that valid? Is that legal? And it's also, even in the terms of the treaty, it says, if we find anything on that land, gold, oil, uranium, tungsten, tin, ammonite, oil, if we find anything on this land here, then we're going to have to renegotiate. It's no longer yours. It's yours as long as we say it's yours. But the purpose of a treaty is to say what? This is yours, this is ours, for the terms of the treaty. These are the terms we have to hold, these are the terms you have to hold. Until there's a formal repudiation, de-ratification, if you will, of the treaty itself. And none of these treaties have been de-ratified. They are still in existence. The 1851, the 1868 Lakota treaties, the 1855, and also the Treaty 7 in Canada are still valid treaties as far as the other side is concerned. And all we need to know is that the other side has asserted the treaties and the other side has gained from asserting the treaties. That's all we need to know. We don't have to get into the fact that they've broken and refused to recognize the terms of the treaty and their obligations on the other side. We only need to know that they knew they had to make a treaty in order to get peace. And as soon as they made that treaty, guess what? They lost the right to say there is no more Lakota Nation. There is no more Blackfoot Nation. They lost that right as soon as they signed and called what they signed a treaty. This will end Module 7. Thank you very much, and we will continue on.